I only needed shelter, but that old hammer was keeping something meant for me.
She was 25 and lost. No husband, no home, no bank card, just a canvas bag and $3 she had hidden inside a coat lining before running through the storm. And with that $3, she bought a forgotten tin ceiling workshop near Canton, Stark County, Ohio. The old site listed in 1987 when the town record marked it abandoned. The rear wall leaned 6 inches inward. The roof leaked through rusted tin seams above. Stark County condemned the workshop on October 14th, 2004, with demolition scheduled for the following spring, if no buyer appeared. Inside the sealed iron heart of the old drop hammer was a hidden compartment unopened for decades, holding a forgotten inheritance that would change Clara's life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Clara had been repairing broken things her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in a narrow farmhouse outside Wooster, Ohio, where winter mornings began with frost on the kitchen glass and the sound of an old furnace working harder than it should. She learned early that objects carried histories. A cracked chair leg, a loose hinge, a chipped bowl were never simply discarded in her family. Someone always tried to give them another season. Her father, Thomas, had hands shaped by machines and farm work. He could listen to an engine and know which part had failed before opening the hood. On Saturdays, when Clara was small, he placed worn tools in her palm and showed her how patience mattered more than force. The person who kept that knowledge alive was her grandfather's older brother, Elias Whitmore, a quiet tin craftsman who spent his weekends inside a small workshop behind his house. Elias restored old ceiling panels, making thin sheets of metal carry patterns that looked carved from stone. Every Saturday morning, Clara sat on a wooden stool near the workbench while Elias prepared his materials. He wiped dust from antique dies, checked the alignment of the press, and heated coffee in a dented steel pot beside the furnace. The smell of warm metal, oil, and cedar shavings stayed with her longer than any lesson from school. Elias taught her the old process slowly. A tin sheet had to be placed exactly between the raised and recessed molds. The machine could not be rushed. A small mistake in pressure could tear the metal or flatten the design. He showed her how craftsmen listened for the sound of a proper strike. You cannot force beauty from a thing. You have to give it the right pressure. Clara carried those words because Elias never spoke of craft as decoration. To him, careful work was a form of respect. The hands mattered, but so did the time spent waiting for the material to answer. When Elias died in 2014, the workshop was emptied within days. His old stamping dies, handwritten notebooks, and brass measuring tools disappeared into an estate sale box. Clara arrived too late. She found only a clean floor where years of work had once stood. By then, her life had narrowed around a different kind of silence. Her husband, Mark, controlled the household money, the passwords, and the decisions that affected both of them. He told Clara that working with her hands was a childish hobby and that a wife should know her place. He rarely raised his voice in public, but at home every room seemed to become smaller when he entered. He kept the bank account under his name. He checked receipts. He questioned every purchase, even small ones from the grocery store. Clara began hiding simple things, not because they were valuable, but because she wanted one corner of her life that still belonged to her. On the night everything ended, snow pressed against the windows and the power flickered twice. Mark stood near the hallway table where Clara had left her coat. "You are leaving this house with nothing." 8 words. He placed her bag outside the door. Her mother watched from the kitchen doorway and did not move. The woman who had once held Clara's hand through childhood fevers stood quietly while the snow gathered on her daughter's shoulders. She did not defend her. She did not ask her to stay. Clara walked until the road disappeared into white. For 6 weeks, she lived between places that were never meant to become homes. She slept 3 nights in the bus station in Akron, 4 nights in the waiting area of a church in Mansfield, and later on a bench near a laundromat in Canton when the owner allowed her inside after closing. Her money slowly disappeared. $2 became $1. $1 became a handful of coins. She washed dishes at a diner outside Medina for meals, carried boxes at a storage facility near Massillon for a few hours of pay, and kept her canvas bag folded beneath her head whenever she slept. The cold changed the way she moved. She stopped walking quickly because rushing wasted energy. She stopped buying coffee because a warm drink lasted only minutes. She learned which public buildings stayed open late and which streets had enough light to feel safe. On a grey afternoon in the Canton Public Library, Clara sat near the local history shelves because the heat worked better there. She was not searching for anything particular. She was only trying to remain indoors until evening. That was where she found the advertisement. It was printed on a faded community bulletin page beneath notices for piano lessons and winter coat donations. Abandoned tin ceiling workshop. Sale price, $3. Buyer responsible for removal and restoration. The listing included an address outside town and a warning that the structure was scheduled for demolition if no one claimed it. Clara read the words several times. The price was almost an insult. But she knew old buildings. She knew abandoned things were often not empty. She knew there were stories trapped inside materials people stopped seeing. The next morning, she used her last money to buy the deed application copies and a bus ticket toward the edge of Stark County. She carried 1 bag, a worn coat, and the memory of a craftsman who had once taught her that pressure could shape something instead of destroy it. She did not know what waited inside the workshop, but she was finally walking toward a place that had been waiting for someone to return. The bus left Clara 3 miles from the old county road because the route no longer continued past the abandoned farms. She stepped down with her bag over one shoulder and watched the taillights disappear into the pale afternoon. The temperature was 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Her boots sank through old snow as she walked along the shoulder, following the directions written in pencil on the deed papers. She crossed 2 frozen fields, passed a closed feed store, and spent 1 night sleeping in a hay barn outside Louisville after the wind became too sharp to continue. The farmer who owned the barn never saw her. She woke before sunrise with straw in her coat and frost along the edge of the wooden door. By morning, she reached Canton. The city felt larger than she expected, with old brick buildings standing beside newer storefronts. She passed the Hartville Hardware Annex, the Canton Bakery, Miller's Shoe Repair, the Maple Street Cafe, and Whitlock Feed Supply before turning toward the county offices. The courthouse stood with tall stone columns and dark wooden doors polished by decades of hands. Clara entered slowly, carrying the cold air with her. The county clerk's office smelled of paper, floor wax, and old radiators. Behind the counter sat a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pinned tightly behind her head. A small scar crossed the back of her left hand, the kind left by years of ordinary work. Her nameplate read, Margaret Bell, County Recorder. Clara placed the papers on the counter. I'm here about the workshop deed. Margaret adjusted her glasses and looked from the document to Clara's face. You understand this property has no electricity? Yes, ma'am. You understand the roof and foundation have both been listed as unsafe? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not repair it, insure it, or guarantee that it can be saved? Yes, ma'am. You understand your purchasing responsibility. Not comfort? Clara looked down at the paper beneath her hand. Yes, ma'am. Margaret studied her for a moment, then reached beneath the counter and brought out a brass stamp. The heavy tool struck the paper with a firm sound that echoed across the quiet office. The directions were precise. Take County Road 62 east until the Walnut Grove. Turn at the collapsed stone wall. Walk past the creek crossing. The building sits behind the old mill foundation. Clara signed her name. Margaret slid the deed forward, but she did not release it immediately. Whitmore. Clara looked up. The clerk touched the surname printed near the bottom of the document. I knew that name. The room seemed to become quieter. My grandfather spoke about an Elias Whitmore. Tin work. Ceiling panels. Beautiful pieces made for places that no longer exist. Clara's fingers tightened around the paper. He was my mentor. Margaret removed her glasses. Your grandfather was not the only one who remembered him. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope containing an old photograph. The image showed a group of craftsmen standing beside a stamping machine. The faces were faded, but the shape of the workshop looked familiar. People thought that trade was finished when those shops closed, Margaret said. Some things disappear because nobody carries them forward. She returned the photograph to the drawer. Maybe this one found the right person. Clara walked back into the cold carrying the deed. The road east was quiet. Near the creek crossing, she met a man named Walter Pierce clearing branches from a fallen walnut tree. He wore a green wool cap with one torn corner and held a small axe against his shoulder. Looking for the old tin place? He asked. Clara nodded. Walter pointed toward the trees. Keep walking until the dog stops barking. A brown shepherd lifted its head from the porch of a nearby farmhouse and watched her pass. Beyond it stood a line of walnut trees, their branches dark against the winter sky. The workshop appeared at the end of the path. It was smaller than Clara had imagined, but heavier somehow, as if the ground itself had decided to keep it there. The building measured roughly 40 feet long and 25 feet wide. Weathered wooden siding covered most of the exterior, though sections had fallen away to reveal older brick underneath. The roof sagged along the northern side. A narrow chimney leaned slightly above the back wall. A rusted sign hung above the entrance. Whitmore Tin Works. The letters were almost gone. Clara stood before the door for a long time. Then she pushed it open. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Old wood, iron dust, damp plaster, and the faint mineral scent of rust filled the air. The cold touched her face immediately, but underneath it was another feeling, the quiet presence of a place that had not been disturbed. Her boots pressed into layers of dust. The front room held a broken desk, a workbench, and shelves covered with grey cloth. A spiderweb moved near the window where the afternoon light entered. Somewhere above her, wind slipped through a crack in the roof and made a low whistle. In the back room stood the machine, the drop hammer, even covered in rust. It dominated the space. The iron frame rose nearly 8 feet high. The suspended hammer block hung above the base, silent and motionless. It looked less like a tool and more like a piece of forgotten industrial history left behind. Clara placed her hand on the cold metal. For a moment, she remembered Elias placing her small fingers beside his larger ones on a similar machine. Outside, the temperature fell after sunset. She found a corner of the front room where the floorboards were strongest and unfolded her coat as a blanket. She ate the last piece of bread from her bag and listened to the building settle around her. The walls creaked. The wind moved. The old machine remained still. The house was not empty. It was keeping a promise. She had found a forgotten place. And the forgotten place had found her. The forgotten places we inherit are often waiting for the hands that can finally hear them. The first 3 days passed through work rather than comfort. Clara woke before sunrise because the cold reached the floor before the light reached the windows. She carried water from the old well behind the workshop, tested the cracked handle of the pump, and learned which boards near the entrance could hold her weight. The floor had a language of its own. One board near the workbench groaned twice before settling. Another near the back door shifted only when the wind came from the north. The outhouse leaned toward the creek, but it remained usable after she cleared fallen branches from the path. The well needed a new cover, the front steps needed support, and every small repair seemed connected to another hidden weakness. On the fourth morning, Clara walked into town for supplies. The hardware store sat between an old barber shop and a closed insurance office. A brass bell above the door rang when she entered. Behind the counter stood Harold Vance, a man with a missing front tooth and a habit of rubbing his thumb across the same spot on the wooden countertop. The store smelled of rope, sawdust, and machine oil. Shelves reached almost to the ceiling, filled with jars of screws, folded tarps, pipe fittings, and tools with wooden handles worn smooth from use. Harold looked at the list Clara had written. "You're fixing the Whitmore place." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Most people would have torn it down. Clara folded the paper once. "I am not most people." Harold gave a small nod. He opened a ledger. "I can put materials on a credit account." Clara shook her head. "I have no money coming in." "I did not ask." The ledger remained open. "Pay when the building pays you back." Before she left, Harold placed a thin manual on the counter. It was a home repair guide from 1968, with handwritten notes in the margins. "My father used this," he said. "It explains things slowly." Clara carried it home carefully. The first supplies were simple. A chimney brush cost $18. A 5-pound box of nails cost $6. A replacement shovel handle cost $11. A roll of roof felt cost $24. A bucket of lime mortar mix cost $16. She bought only what she needed. The chimney was the first serious danger. For decades, moisture had entered through the cracked crown, freezing and expanding inside the brick. Clara climbed carefully, removed loose sections by hand, and worked downward. Instead of forcing damaged pieces outward, she used a small brush to clear creosote from the interior flue, then scraped away the softened mortar joints. The work took 8 hours the first day, then 7, then 5 more. The soot covered her sleeves and darkened her fingernails. The old chimney had not failed because it was poorly made. It had failed because nobody had listened to it. She rebuilt the upper courses using compatible mortar instead of modern cement. Harold had explained that old brick needed room to move. "Old things break when you trap them," he told her. The repair continued for nearly a week. Each morning she checked the weather before climbing. Each evening she recorded what she had done in the margin of Elias's old notebook that she found beneath a pile of collapsed papers. She had expected to find instructions. Instead, she found reminders. Check twice. Measure slowly. Do not hurry the material. At the end of the week, she cleared the chimney opening and prepared for the first fire. She gathered dry walnut branches from the fallen tree near the road, arranged smaller pieces beneath larger ones, and waited until the flame established itself before adding more wood. The smoke rose cleanly. For the first time since arriving, the workshop became warm. Clara sat near the small iron stove with a bowl of soup she had cooked over the fire. The meal was plain: beans, onions, and a little bread from the cafe in town. She ate slowly. The building no longer felt like something she had entered. It felt like something she was learning. The workroom behind the drop hammer became her next discovery. She did not search quickly. She cleaned one surface at a time. She found 7 things that mattered. A wooden pattern board with a Victorian leaf design carved into its surface. A set of steel measuring gauges wrapped in oilcloth. 3 brass punches with Elias's initials scratched into the handles. A broken clock that had stopped at 4:17. A notebook filled with measurements and small sketches. A tin tray containing pieces of unfinished ceiling panels. And beneath the workbench, a cedar disc about the size of a dinner plate. The cedar disc was strange because nothing else around it carried that scent anymore. It smelled fresh. She lifted it and tapped the floor beneath the workbench. A hollow sound answered. Clara stopped. She tapped again. The sound came from the direction of the drop hammer. The machine had always seemed too heavy to move, but now she noticed something she had missed. The hammer block did not sit exactly as it should. The weight was uneven. The centre carried a different balance. She spent the afternoon cleaning around the base. There was a small seam. Not a crack. A seam. The iron block weighed hundreds of pounds, but a section near the centre had been carefully altered. Someone had removed and replaced part of the metal decades earlier. Clara found no hidden latch, only patience. She used a wooden wedge, a small hammer, and careful pressure. The opening did not break. It released. Inside was a wrapped package, then another, then a narrow tin box. She placed everything on the workbench and opened each one slowly. The first package contained old craft tools, engraving knives, pattern stamps, a measuring compass, and several dies wrapped in faded cloth. The second held raw sheets of preserved tin and steel, protected from moisture by layers of wax paper. The tin box contained envelopes and money. Clara counted every bill twice. Inside were old banknotes and carefully saved coins totaling $51,300. The coins included wheat pennies, Indian head pennies, Liberty nickels, and silver mercury dimes. Mixed among them was a small military medal dated 1944. She held the medal between her fingers. No celebration came, no sudden feeling of rescue. Only the quiet understanding that someone had hidden this carefully because they believed the right person would eventually find it. The last item was a sealed envelope. Her name was not written on it. No name was written at all. Clara placed it beside the lamp. She did not open it that night. Instead, she stepped outside and walked toward the creek. The water moved beneath thin ice, carrying small pieces of winter away. She sat beside the bank until the sky turned dark. The workshop stood behind her, silent and steady. The forgotten places we inherit are often waiting for the hands that can finally hear them. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise. The envelope remained where she had left it. A thin layer of dust from the old workbench covered one corner, but the paper itself was untouched. She carried it to the window where the winter light was strongest. The handwriting stopped her. She knew those letters, the careful slant, the heavy pressure on certain words, the small space between sentences. It was Elias's writing. Clara sat at the workbench and opened the envelope with the same care she had used opening the packages from the drop hammer. Inside was a single folded letter. My dear one, whoever you are, if you're reading this, then the workshop has found someone willing to listen. My name is Elias Whitmore, and I wrote these words on March 3rd, 1991, from Mercy Hospital in Canton, Ohio. Dr. Samuel Rourke diagnosed me with pulmonary fibrosis after years of breathing dust and smoke from the trade I loved. He told me my lungs had become like old paper, still valuable but unable to hold what they once carried. I am writing this because I do not know who will open this letter. It may be a stranger. It may be family. It may be someone who simply needs a place where their hands can remember they belong. The Whitmore line began with my great-grandfather Samuel Whitmore, born in 1838 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He moved to Canton in 1865 and opened a small metal shop. His son, George Whitmore, born in 1872, expanded the work after learning architectural stamping in Cleveland, Ohio. George's daughter, Eleanor Whitmore, born in 1901, preserved the patterns after the factories changed. My father, Thomas Whitmore, born in 1930 in Massillon, Ohio, taught me that a craft survives only when someone is willing to repeat the work carefully. The trade closed on September 18th, 1959. That was the date the Whitmore Tin Works stopped taking orders. More than 30 years passed before I wrote this. Silence can become a habit if nobody interrupts it. My brother Daniel was lost during the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium in 1944. My wife, Margaret, kept his photograph above our stove until the day she died. She always said that people leave pieces of themselves inside the work they finish. If you choose to restore this place, remember the lessons. Heat tin sheets slowly to no more than 350 degrees Fahrenheit when preparing damaged sections, because rushed metal remembers stress. Mix lime mortar with a ratio close to 1 part lime to 3 parts washed sand, then allow it to cure slowly rather than forcing it dry. Let painted tin panels rest for at least 24 hours between coats. Keep your dies clean and aligned within a fraction of an inch, because a beautiful pattern begins with exact preparation. The machine will teach you patience. The hammer does not create the design by violence alone. It creates it through controlled pressure. The money hidden inside the hammer is not payment. It is time saved for whoever comes after me. Use what you need. Protect what remains. There will always be another person searching for a door that opens. Inheritance is not measured by what a person receives. It is measured by what they are willing to care for after receiving it. The workshop was never mine. I was only its keeper for a while. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elias Whitmore, March 3, 1991. Clara read the letter once without moving. Then she read it again. The second time. She noticed details she had missed. The mention of Daniel. The careful instructions. The sentence about being a keeper rather than an owner. When she finished, she folded the paper along the original creases and returned it to the envelope. She did not place it away. She carried it with her through the workshop. The back door opened with effort because the swollen wood had shifted during winter. Beyond it, behind a line of old walnut trees, she found the marker described nowhere except in the letter. A flat stone stood beside the creek. The name carved into it was simple, Whitmore. Below it were smaller words. Keep the hands working. Clara touched the carving. The stone was cold, but it had been kept. Inside the workshop, she returned to the workbench and lifted one of Elias's old brass oil lamps. The glass was cloudy, and the wick had nearly disappeared, but after cleaning it carefully, she filled it with oil and struck a match. The flame was small. It was enough. The first kindness came from Margaret Bell at the county office, who had quietly delayed the demolition paperwork while Clara completed the purchase. The second came from Harold Vance, who kept adding supplies to the ledger without asking for immediate payment. The third came from Walter Pierce, who left firewood near the workshop door without leaving his name. There were people who had offered help without expecting to be remembered. And maybe that was the kind of inheritance Elias meant. Before we continue, think about one small kindness you once received from a stranger, neighbor, or friend. What was the moment? And did you ever get the chance to tell that person what it meant to you? Share it with us if you feel comfortable. That night, Clara slept on the workshop floor with the old tools beside her and Elias's letter beneath the lamp. The heirlooms were not treasures because they were old. They were treasures because someone had trusted them to continue. December arrived with the first snow on December 4th, 2022. 6 inches covered the workshop roof overnight. And Clara woke to the sound of melting water finding the weak places beneath the shingles. She carried Elias's repair manual to the table and read the roofing chapter 3 times before making a single measurement. The roof was 30 feet by 25 feet. She calculated the material carefully: 11 bundles of shingles, 2 rolls of felt paper, and 4 pounds of roofing nails with enough extra for mistakes. Harold Vance checked her numbers without correcting them. "You counted twice. I wanted to be sure." "Good." The next morning, Harold brought her an old roofing hatchet with a wooden handle darkened by decades of use. "My uncle used this," he said. "He would want it working again." The tool was heavier than Clara expected. A week later, Walter introduced her to Arthur Bell, a retired roofer who had repaired barns and churches across Stark County. Arthur had a faded wool cap, a stiff left knee, and hands that moved slowly but knew exactly where every tool belonged. When Clara offered payment, he shook his head. "Just hold the line straight." For 11 days they worked through wind, snow, and short winter afternoons. Arthur showed her how to snap a chalk line so the shingles followed the structure instead of fighting it. He taught her to replace the damaged sister rafter beside the northern beam and showed her the 3-stroke nail technique: set, drive, finish. One morning, Clara placed a nail slightly too high. Arthur looked at it. "That nail's proud." Clara removed it. "Pull it." They finished the roof in mid-December. From the ground, the workshop looked almost unchanged, but inside, the difference was quiet. The dripping stopped. The building could breathe again. By January, the chimney demanded attention. The old bricks had begun to spall, leaving small red fragments around the fireplace opening. The mortar had turned into powder in several joints, and every strong wind carried another piece away. Clara rebuilt it slowly. She removed the damaged sections, cleaned each brick, and mixed hydraulic lime with fireclay in a careful ratio that matched the older construction. The work was done in small sections because the temperatures stayed in the 20s Fahrenheit, too cold for rushing. For 3 weeks, she climbed the scaffold each morning wearing gloves that eventually became stiff with mortar. Every 15 minutes, she removed them and pressed her hands together near the stove because her fingers lost feeling in the cold. She never complained about the weather. The chimney had waited decades. She could wait a little longer. The test fire came late in January. Clara opened the damper, placed dry wood inside, and watched the smoke rise through the repaired chimney. This time, it moved upward cleanly. No hesitation. No return into the room. She sat beside the fire that evening and listened to the sound of a building becoming useful again. The floors came next. The workshop had original white pine planks beneath years of dust, paint, and footsteps. Some boards carried marks from machines that had been removed before Clara was born. She rented a random orbit sander from Harold for $14 per day and began the slow process of revealing the wood beneath. The work required 3 passes: 80 grit first, 120 second, 220 for the final smoothing. The old boards changed gradually. The grey surface disappeared, then the lighter tones beneath it emerged. After 3 coats of oil and a 48-hour cure between the final layers, the floor shifted from dark honey toward the deep colour of mahogany. The improvement was not dramatic. It was honest. One morning, Clara woke unable to work. The floor was ready for another coat, but her body refused the movement. She walked instead to the marsh beyond the walnut trees and watched a great blue heron stand motionless beside the water. She stayed there the entire day. The workshop did not fall apart because she rested. The next morning, she returned. The windows waited. There were 8 in total. 3 had no glass. 4 had cracks spreading through old panes. One original pane from 1788 remained intact, and Clara preserved it exactly as it was, placing a protective frame around the fragile glass. She repaired the others using traditional methods. She removed loose glazing, pressed DAP 33 putty into the channels and smoothed the edges with a small blade. The sash cords were replaced with 1/4-inch cotton rope, tied using a figure-8 knot around the counterweights so the windows could rise evenly again. The work took longer than expected because every frame had changed shape over time. Nothing was perfectly square, but nothing needed to be. On the final window, Clara stood outside with a small brush in her hand. The repaired frame caught the afternoon light. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch above her. It stayed only a few seconds, then it flew away. Clara returned inside and closed the window gently. The workshop grew quieter, not empty. Ready! By late February. The walls were ready. The worst damage waited near the chimney where years of heat and moisture had separated the old plaster from the hand-split oak lath beneath. Clara removed the loose sections carefully and saved the pieces that still held the shape of the original surface. The first 3 patches failed. The first cracked overnight. The second pulled away at the edges. The third held for a week before a thin line appeared down the centre. Clara returned to Harold's store and found an old canvas bag behind the counter. "My father saved this," he said. Inside was horsehair kept for traditional plaster work. She mixed lime plaster with the fibres and began again. The scratch coat went on first, pressed firmly into the lath and scored with shallow marks so the next layer could grip. The brown coat followed at 3/8 of an inch, and she waited 72 hours before adding the final layer. The finish coat was only 1/8 of an inch. Thin. Careful. Enough. When the last surface dried, Clara ran her hand across the repaired wall. "These patches will hold another 100 years. She wrote the date beside the repair in Elias's notebook. The wall remained imperfect. That was part of its honesty. The people around the workshop continued appearing in small ways. Doris from the Maple Street Cafe had a habit of leaving paper bags on Clara's doorstep before sunrise. She wore a blue apron with one missing button and always carried a pencil behind her ear. Inside the bags were bread, soup, and sometimes a small piece of pie. Clara tried to pay her. Doris shook her head. "When the shop reopens, pay me in candles." That was all she said. She never explained why. She never needed to. In early March, a teenage boy arrived at the workshop on a green Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul tied across the back rack. His name was Caleb. He was quiet, with mud on his boots and a jacket 2 sizes too large. "I can split the walnut logs," he said. Clara offered money. He shook his head. My mother said, "About your grandfather?" He lowered his eyes and lifted the maul. That was enough. He returned several Saturdays, splitting wood into pieces that dried beside the workshop wall. Reverend Boyd passed the property every morning on his way into town. He was an older man with a silver watch chain visible beneath his coat. He never entered without being invited. He simply stopped at the gate, tipped his hat, and continued walking. One morning, he paused longer. "Keep the light burning." Then he gave a 4-word prayer. "May your hands remember." Clara watched him leave. The kindnesses around the workshop were never large enough to make the work easy. They were simply large enough to make the work possible. Clara postponed the cellar until February 11th because the ground remained frozen beneath the back room. When she finally opened the old entrance, she discovered a space measuring 12 by 15 feet with a field stone floor and 7 granite steps descending into the earth. The cellar was not damaged. It was waiting. At the centre sat a dressed granite slab. A craft mark had been carved into its surface. the same symbol that appeared on several of Elias's oldest patterns. Clara placed both hands against the stone. She did not lift it. Some things deserved to remain closed until their time arrived. Beneath the third step, however, she noticed a gap. A small oak box had been wedged between the stones. Inside was a brass key. The bow of the key was shaped like the symbol of the heritage craft, a small reminder of the work that had brought her there. There was also a tintype photograph. The image showed a young woman standing outside the cottage in 1903. She held a tin stamping tool in one hand. Clara stared at the photograph for a long time. The woman's face looked impossibly familiar. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Female ancestor, daughter of founder, aged 25, summer of 1903. The name had worn away. The date remained. The key went onto the mantel. Clara did not know what it opened. She decided that not knowing was sometimes part of keeping something safe. Spring arrived slowly. The snow withdrew from the fields. The creek became louder, and walnut catkins appeared like small green threads against the branches. Clara walked the property each morning before beginning work. She had enough money to begin making tin panels again, but she chose not to start the full craft that spring. She would practice first, small samples, small mistakes. She would spend 1 coin from the hidden money on materials and keep learning from the machine before asking it for anything larger. The drop hammer remained where it had always been. Silent, patient. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Clara placed her first completed heritage craft object on the workbench. It was a small tin ceiling panel, not for sale, not for display. A practice piece made from the same method Elias had taught her years earlier. She prepared the sheet, aligned the dies, checked the pressure, and lowered the hammer slowly before allowing the weight to fall. The design emerged. Acanthus leaves curved across the surface. The metal had remembered. The restored workshop remained modest. The front room held the repaired floor, the original desk, and the brass oil lamp that still burned during winter evenings. The workroom held the drop hammer, the preserved dies, and the tools that had travelled through generations of careful hands. Nothing looked new. That was intentional. The building carried every season it had survived. The answer to the brass key came in April. Clara was clearing fallen branches near the oldest walnut tree when she noticed a small iron plate hidden beneath the bark. The key fit perfectly. Behind the plate was a narrow wooden compartment. Inside was a folded 48-star American flag and a note protected by wax paper. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor Whitmore. The note was dated July 20, 1100 and 104. No. during the final months of World War I. It spoke of Samuel Whitmore's son, who had left for service overseas and never returned home. It did not describe him as a hero or a symbol. It described him as a person. A brother who sang while repairing fences. A son who kept a pocket watch. A man who believed ordinary work mattered. The flag had been placed there not to hide the past, but to protect a memory that deserved a quiet place. The military medal Clara found inside the drop hammer was later honoured at Zoar Cemetery on November 11th, 2024, the anniversary of Armistice Day. There was no ceremony, no crowd, only Clara, a small flag, and a few minutes of silence. The $51,300 remained mostly untouched. She used only 3 coins and 2 small portions of the saved money for materials, tools, and repairs that could not wait. The rest was sealed inside a new envelope inside the old iron hammer. On the outside, she wrote, "For the next one, the workshop reopened quietly. No announcement, no newspaper article, just an index card placed on the corkboard at the Maple Street Cafe. Tin ceiling restoration. Small projects accepted. By appointment." Within a year, more than 40 names had been written on the mailing list. Some wanted repairs. Some wanted lessons. Some simply wanted to see the old machine work again. Caleb returned one autumn morning carrying a hand-carved wooden sign. He had grown taller. The bicycle was gone. The quietness remained. The sign read, "Whitmore Tin Works and Daughters." Clara held it for a long time. She asked him why he added the last words. Caleb shrugged. Because someone should. She placed the sign above the entrance. The letters were not perfect. Neither were hers. Years later, Clara began writing her own letter. She sat at the same workbench where Elias had written his final words. The lamp burned beside her. The drop hammer stood nearby. At the top of the page, she wrote, "My dear one, whoever you are." She did not know who would find it. She did not know when, but she understood now that every craft had a future only because someone believed another pair of hands would arrive. The forgotten places we inherit are often waiting for the hands that can finally hear them. The tin ceiling workshop waited. It had always waited. It waited through empty winters, through locked doors, through years when nobody remembered the sound of the hammer falling. Now it held the sound again. A careful strike. A measured breath. A person learning. The tin ceiling workshop waits. It has always waited. And in the county clerk's office. Inside Margaret Bell's old wooden desk drawer, Clara's original $3 bill remained folded beneath the paperwork. Margaret never spent it. She kept it there as proof that sometimes a place is not purchased because someone has enough. Sometimes a place is saved because someone has just enough to begin.